Joy joins us today. She is a strategic resume writer, a career coach, an outplacement counselor, and a recruitment consultant. She shares with us some great tips, including her favorite question, which has now become my favorite question. Stay tuned. I have Joy, who's a recruitment consultant. We met a number of years ago when we were both working on similar strategies about bringing in mechanics from the UK and Ireland. And then ever since then, we've sort of kept in touch with each other via LinkedIn. And Joy was kind enough to have a conversation with us about her strategies about recruitment selection on admin positions. And at the end, Joy has also written a bestseller about looking for work in the downturn or something along those lines. I'm sure I've butchered that, but we will go into more detail on that. So, Joy, for those individuals that don't know much about you, can you just give us a rough background on how you ended up being a maverick of so many various positions and roles, including a recruitment consultant?
Oh, that's a really big question, Adam. My career was quite circuitous, and so in a nutshell, I had to change careers. Many years ago, I was a social worker and counselor, and I needed to change careers, change the type of work I did while dealing with a personal crisis in my life, because one cannot ethically work with other people in crisis when one is in crisis themselves. So I went to see a career coach who helped me to identify possible occupational pursuits in which I could use my transferable skills and knowledge. And this person also trained me to do well in behavioral interviewing, and so I had a much better handle on what goes on the other side. And then I was able to land a teaching position at Bow Valley College, where my role basically was to coach the students on how to behave in an interview, how to look for work, how to write their resumes and cover letters, and how to present themselves to potential employers. So it was quite serendipitous when that happened. And subsequent to that, I was hired back as a social worker to provide recruitment and training work at the Distress Center. And the Distress Center is an organization that focuses on mental health professionals. So we recruit crisis line workers, social workers, and counselors, and people to do with mental health and wellness in the community. And so my role was to find the best ways to recruit and train our new and onboard our new hires, as well as our practicum students, and that kind of thing. So there were a number of strategies that I employed in order to do that and to reach into that arena where I would likely find good candidates for those roles. And subsequent to that, I stepped back into the private sector, where I landed a job as a recruitment specialist at a recruitment firm, and I focused on a lot of administration, a lot of temporary employees and that kind of thing. But I had a lot of engineers and STEM professionals as well on my docket, who I really enjoyed the privilege of assisting and assisting with placement and those kinds of things. And then it was sort of an organic growth, and then I started to develop other skill sets related to being on both sides of the table. On the one hand, having a recruitment perspective, being able to think like an employer. On the other hand, when I'm helping a candidate, being able to provide that kind of context and tell them, quite frankly, what I would think about them if I was recruiting. And it really helps give me an edge in being able to find the best candidates and or prepare the candidates who might not have been as well prepared as they could have been, so that they would be presented to our client companies uh, on the list of people who could be hired. And I hope that, in a nutshell, answers that question.
It does very well. So we're going to be focusing on admin roles. If you
Mhm.
could just take me through a typical process of a client has reached out to you for a typical office administrative role where they're going to be doing some data entry, answering the phones, documents, email preparation, working with Word, Microsoft, sort of just daily office administrative kind of roles.
Mhm.
How, from sort of big picture, start to finish, how would you go about attacking finding a person for that kind of role?
Well, first of all, one of the things that we want to do is very clearly have an interview with the decision maker, the employer, the person who would be supervising this person in the role, to really get a sense of what it is that they want and need. Because, as you know, beyond what's written on a job descriptions, there are other things that may be nuanced that might be difficult to define. So it's very important to get a sense of the needs of the I'll call that the client, the person who would be hiring for that position. Um, Very often, so that will also inform the writing of a well-written job description. With that in mind, it's also important to keep a candidate pool list. I keep a very strong list of candidates, and I make sure that they are sorted according to skills and occupation and all those kinds of things. When somebody first applies for a job, for an admin role, I'm looking for the key skills that are needed, the must-haves. And so, for example, uh, definitely somebody needs to have Microsoft Office suite. They need to have telephone etiquette. They need to be personable. They need to be able to uh, maintain an organized workspace and be able to juggle multiple priorities or reprioritize quickly depending on the nature of the work. But when we talk about admin roles, there are specialized admin roles, as you know. So, for example, for legal or for medical or for uh, further on in medical, there could be health unit health unit clerks and medical office assistants, dental business assistants, legal assistants, and general office support staff. And so, depending on the need, there are some differences in what people do in those admin roles. And therefore, if somebody is applying for a medical office assistant role and they have no experience in the medical field whatsoever, they'll immediately be screened out because they require things like medical terminology and understanding healthcare processes and procedures and running of a medical office and dealing with coding and insurance and those kinds of things. And so it's fairly easy from my perspective to be able to uh, uh, distinguish the possible candidates from ones who definitely I'd have to screen out right away. From the time I get a resume in and I screen them into the A, B, or C pile, typically it takes me less than 20 seconds to scan a resume, and this is something that's uh, really important, um, that I advise my candidates to make sure that you have the most important aspects up front and center on the resume and not buried somewhere on the second page, because I'm looking for key things such as, uh, for example, in admin, keyboarding speed, which software programs they're conversant with, how much experience they've had, which industries they've worked in. Admin for oil and gas can be very specialized. as it can be for medical or for legal. And so I'm looking for those key things to be articulated front and center, supported by accomplishments related to that. If I'm receiving resumes that are essentially reiterating lists of job duties, I do become suspicious. It's not that I won't look at that candidate, but I certainly will look at somebody else first whose resume stands out with specific examples supporting how, when, and so on, how they use those skills, when they use them, and what the result was, and those kinds of things. Is that helpful for you so
That
far?
is. So you mentioned that one of the key elements that is critically important is meeting with that hiring manager and
Hmm.
figuring out those nuances that just might not be on a job description.
Hmm.
Uh, w- how do you formulate your job postings, and what are some tips that you could give individuals that you have found helpful when you're posting a job, or sorry, when you're writing the job posting?
Well, writing a job posting, typically, first of all, I want job postings are when I'm analyzing a job posting, they're usually analyzed from uh, the bottom first and then up to the top. But typically starting with the must-haves under the I start with the qualifications. I will rearrange these in the job posting, but I will start with the understanding the basic qualifications that are needed for this type of role. So, for example, the how many years of experience, what software competencies and keyboarding competencies, uh, what um, what kinds of industries this person has worked in. Uh, are there other things that might be? Are there things that are nice to have? And those would be put on a separate section of the job posting. The other part of the job posting is very important, is to have a description of the company. And I also encourage with social media these days. And more employers are getting on board with providing some kind of a video link to uh, show, showing employees talking about the culture at the company and those kinds of things. I think that's really important these days because to attract, particularly if we're trying to attract millennials and so forth, we really do need to speak their language and use some more creative ways of attracting their attention, because it is a two-way conversation. So having some company information on there that is not so dense in text that it makes it difficult to read. I find that as I read and do these things all day long, I find it can be a bit tedious. And then followed by very clearly who the position reports to. I think it's very important to actually put the name of a person that somebody could actually target the cover letter to. Have a salary range on there. Have the typical responsibilities on there, to the main responsibilities. And generally, I find where it can get sticky is when the hiring manager lists absolutely everything and anything about the most ideal candidate who doesn't exist. And that can be problematic because sometimes to the detriment of candidates, they don't apply because they think they are missing one or two elements of that posting, and therefore they think they are not necessarily qualified, and that's not always the case, as you know. The uh, let's see if there's certifications, diplomas, and other kinds of supporting documentation that should be included with an application. I would certainly put it on there. For admin, I really do like to have people organized before they apply for a position. So if they can ahead of time provide supporting documentation where they've had their skills tested and attested to for keyboarding speed, the ability to use Microsoft Office Suite, for example, at an intermediate to higher level. That would be helpful to include those kinds of results as an addendum to their application, because that will also help. Otherwise, when I do get a candidate in, I will likely request that they do some testing
Right.
in
And
order to prove the skill sets that they claim to have.
absolutely. So you did mention some of the ways that you pre-screen the resumes and A and B piles, and in addition to you're looking for specific skills. Do you use any kind of ranking system or scale, whether it be through the pre-screening the resumes or through asking questions and rating the answers of those questions?
I'm, I'm actually, I don't think uh, I'm as in detail as that. I most certainly I do write all over the resumes, and I do ask some questions beforehand, and I am I suppose because I'm an older person myself, I tend to use a lot of highlighting and those kinds of things, as I know what to look for. So I'm not as I would say as sophisticated as your newer recruiters would be using those kind of tools. And
Okay,
so
there's
if
nothing
that
wrong with something that works.
yeah, I use what works. But the other thing that I use to screen people, I I do Google them, and I want to see what comes up in terms of their social media.
Their
I do
digital footprint, as some people refer it to.
digital footprint is very important. Those without a digital footprint, that could be construed as a negative uh, in this day and age. But I do look for a LinkedIn profile, and on a LinkedIn profile, I do look for the ones that are fairly well developed, that have 5 to 10 recommendations, because that also helps in uh, preventing a candidate. Because if your recommendation is out there on LinkedIn, there's really nothing to stop somebody from asking that person, "Did you really write this recommendation? Do you really exist?" But it does help. It does help me when I'm looking for candidates. LinkedIn is one of the number one tools that I use to to find candidates. I do advertise jobs on LinkedIn, as well as I know that not all candidates are on LinkedIn, but uh, the recruiters are on LinkedIn, employers are on LinkedIn, and they most certainly have been helpful in sharing the posts. And of course, we have to go where the candidates are, and research is showing that the candidates are on other social media platforms such as Instagram and Snapchat, and Facebook is still quite quite big.
Yeah, and just for individuals who are lighting torches and saying that you can't do that, I just want to um, point out that you said that you Googled the individuals, and it is public domain and knowledge. And if individuals choose to post something online, you're not talking about creeping somebody's
Not at all.
Facebook or following somebody on Instagram or Twitter, but you're doing just a general Google search to see if anything comes up
Hmm.
of interest, and it can be both positive and negative. And like you said, it's a double-edged sword. When somebody has no digital footprint, it raises eyebrows, and if then somebody has a digital footprint of nothing but personal, sort of questionable pictures and posts and things like that, that's not good either. And so
Hmm.
having that Goldilocks zone. You
Yes.
mentioned a little bit earlier also about testing and about speed and
Hmm.
competencies in Microsoft Office and that sort of thing.
Hmm.
Other than those tests that you mentioned, is there any other ones that you
Hmm.
rely on?
Um, I like to if my client has the resources, I like to set up a simulation where we have a dedicated office for that purpose, and to see how that candidate handles multiple phone calls coming in and what their phone manner is like, so we simulate a work situation for that person to see how they respond. Some clients, if it's a pretty high potential candidate, sometimes I'm able to advocate to have them have a job audition for a week and see how they do.
At the sort of probation period.
Yep, to see how they do and see how they get along with the team and those kinds of things, because let's face it, we can answer those interview questions if we practice enough and we know what to say and how to say it, and we can certainly write stellar resumes or get some help doing that. But the bottom line is, can they do the job? Do they want to do the job? And will they do the job?
Absolutely. So you also kind of touched upon this, but how do you go about formulating your questions for the interview? And then do you use the same set of questions for each candidate, or do you customize it to each individual candidate walking in?
I do change it up a bit for sure, but there are some questions that I think are standard about, for example, tell me about yourself and your interest in your relationship or your background and how it meets the requirements of this position. Open-ended questions. I want to hear what that person has to say. I want to hear how they would link their experience to what I'm looking for. I want to hear how concise they are. I'm listening very much for not just for those examples, but how they say those examples, how they provide the information, how they speak. Do they ramble on? Those kinds of things.
What are some of your favorite questions to ask?
Oh, my favorite questions to ask. There was this is an interesting one. I really like this one. It's about if you tell me about a time that you have volunteered to do something to increase your knowledge and skills at work, as opposed to being asked to do so. And how did you seek that out? What were the results? And what I'm listening for when I ask that question are examples of, I'm listening to hear if this person really is a continuous learner. Being a continuous learner is integral to any type of work that we're doing. And so I listen carefully to hear what that person has to say, and particularly to listen for things that they're not saying.
I am so stealing that question. That is a great question to ask in any candidate for any position. It really
Mm-hmm.
shows if the candidate is seeking to learn additional skills or if they're just there to do the job that they were assigned to do. That is an excellent question. When you're interviewing a candidate, what are some good signs that the interview is going well and this person has potential to find employment in the near future?
Well, a couple of things. Certainly, I do want to probe into what brings them through the door. If they're currently employed and they are interviewing for the position that I am advertising, I'd like to find out a little bit more about what is prompting them to want to make a change. And many people need to make changes for different reasons, Adam, as you know. It could be as simple as I've done everything I can do. There doesn't seem to be any more I can contribute in terms of growing with and for this organization, and I would really like the opportunity to use my new skills in whatever that is to contribute to this project. It sounds very exciting. So I want to find out more about what prompts them to want this opportunity, what prompts them to want to leave their job, or why did they leave their last job. I think that's also a very important question to ask of a candidate, because what I'm listening for is to ensure that they have a sound um, reason for leaving story that is positive, that is not bad mouthing their former or their present employer in any way. That's a It's a good sign when someone is prepared to explain, as a result of the downturn, several positions were eliminated in my department, including mine, and I was offered a severance package, and now I'm excited to use my knowledge and skills that I've gained from ABC Company to move forward into new adventures.
So bad mouthing a past employer is a warning sign for you. What are some other warning signs?
Well, we were talking about some of the good signs, so I'll go back to that for a second, and then I'll talk about the warning signs. Um, the candidate's prepared. They're organized. They are. They're talking about my needs if I'm the recruiter or the employer on what they can do to take away my pain. They take notes. They listen more, and their questions are thoughtful, and they really do talk about specific outcomes. Everybody in any occupation has accomplishments, and if you can, how many VPs did you support in that role? How many calls a day, a year, a month, a week did you field in that company and provide that information when you were doing data entry? How was your accuracy? So when somebody is able to quantify, it shows me they've done some good thinking and good preparation for the interview. The other thing that is a really good sign is if the reception staff, the front desk staff, are treated well. I always check in with the front desk staff to see how they were treated by the candidate. And if I find that they were mistreated, that's a bad sign.
No, that is an excellent tip and a tip for everyone. That it really does ask the receptionist how that individual walked into the office, how they asked for an interview. Did they shake hands, give a big
Mm-hmm.
smile? Were
Mm-hmm.
they courteous? You are absolutely right. It does say a lot about that person's character, how they treat reception when they walk through the door.
Mm-hmm. Other good signs that person asks thoughtful questions and that they do have questions to ask uh, of me. Tell me what created the need for this position. Uh, what kind of challenges might I expect? Um, can you tell me what a good day and a bad day might look like in this role? Or they ask intelligent questions, and then they link what I say back to how they can help me solve problems in my workplace. Warning signs: lateness, rudeness to the reception or admin staff. The candidate doesn't answer the questions or um, does not answer the questions specifically. Their answers are vague. Their answers are hypothetical. Uh, so that's to me a big red flag. If the candidate knows absolutely nothing about the company, what the company does, what it provides, that's a red flag as well. Candidates who show up unprofessionally dressed, uh, not well groomed, all those kinds of things, they are definitely not going to be doing well in the interview. And the other thing I noticed as well, whether you are recruiting in a recruitment firm on behalf of a firm or an agency, or you're an in-house recruiter, when a candidate doesn't treat that interview, the preliminary screening interview with the recruiter with the seriousness that they should, then that's a warning sign. I won't present them to the hiring manager.
Those are all great warning signs.
Mm-hmm.
How do you feel about references and what kind of question? A lot of people feel that they're just a necessary evil, um, and sort of like car insurance. You need to do it just in case that
Mm-hmm.
1% will give you a negative reference.
Mm-hmm.
What's your feeling on references and what kind of questions do you find most useful asking references?
Okay, that's a really good question, and I really like that actually. First of all, as we know from a legal standpoint, we do have to conduct a reference check. It's without question, and if you don't conduct a reference check, you're really not doing your due diligence, and it's not just about in case you have to go back and there's a bad hire. Uh, you have to also look at the safety implications for your organization, because if you haven't conducted a reference check and you do hire that person and they do something that causes harm to themselves or other people or the workplace, uh, that you can get yourself in legal hot water for that and that alone. But talking about the references, first of all, it is important to verify questions that you're going to be asking. Um, uh, you need to be able to verify the employment, the dates, the job titles, and the tasks that that person uh, completed. I think it's really important to try to have at least two, if not more, supervisory references. You want to verify why they left the job, if it's possible. Bearing in mind, as you know, Adam, so there are some companies that will not, uh, that have a policy that they don't provide references, or they can only confirm that that person worked there, uh, those kinds of things. So you do want to do some probing. And so I do actually, when I phone references, I I type down almost verbatim what they're saying so that I can make sure that I interpret it correctly. How they know the candidate, um, can they tell me about some of the accomplishments related? So I will relate those specific questions to what I need from my job posting. Can you tell me about their ability to work under pressure? Are there any examples you can recall of a time when the candidates did that, and how that turned out? So I do want to hear about the dragon slaying stories, as it were. I'd also like to hear more about, of course, the strengths and weaknesses, their abilities to get along with others. I'd like to find out, uh, bottom line, would you hire this person back if you could?
That is my favorite question. Really, that question in
That tells
itself.
it all.
Yeah, without it's like if there was a position available and the person reapplied, would you rehire that person? If I get a no or I get a long pause, I have
Hmm.
my answer.
You bet. You bet.
That was great. So if you very rarely, but let's say you have five perfect candidates, all of them could do the job very well. You feel very comfortable presenting all five, but you can only present one or two. How do you go about making that decision of who do you choose to present or who do you choose to hire?
Well, that's a really good question. Um, I think I have to go back to my interview notes, and I'd have to really go back and review that, because it, that happens all the time. Well, it used to happen all the time, and it doesn't necessarily happen all the time now. But when that does happen, um, I might want to go back to I might want to go back to a few things in the interview, and see if I can make my decision that way. That is so difficult, Adam. I don't know if I'm actually going to be able to uh, discern that. I might have a second round of interviews. I might provide them with a case study to complete based related to their work. So here's the scenario. How would you handle this in these specific areas? And I may have them do a bit of a written assessment.
No, that's a really good tip, giving another round to try to gain some additional information
Hmm.
if you're having a difficult decision or difficult choice trying to make a decision.
Sometimes I'll just interject. Sometimes you can learn a lot about people if you take them out for lunch.
Absolutely.
and see how they treat the serving staff, and see how their manners are.
Yeah, I don't know if we recently read the same article or not on LinkedIn, but there was an article, I think a week ago or so, where one of the CEOs takes out their candidates for breakfast or lunch and purposefully has pre-assigned
Hmm.
um, with the cook to mess up the
Yeah,
candidate's order.
yeah.
And they see how the candidate treats the messed up order.
I think that's an excellent idea,
Yeah.
because at the end of the day, we're working with people, and we want to see how people are. And one of the best ways to do that, I think, would be to find ways to catch them off guard, and in not a malicious way. But I think that's a great thing to do, because uh, I think you can learn a lot about how that person responds to the mini crises uh, by observing them in real life.
Right. And so you've mentioned highlighters in the past. Are there any other tools and technologies that you use to help you through your recruitment process?
Well, I do use spreadsheets.
Mm.
I do use
In what,
spreadsheets
how?
in several ways. One, to summarize my thoughts on the interview process and how they answered questions, strengths and weaknesses. I collate all the data in terms of the reference check. And the bottom line question, of course, I like to find out if would you hire them back, because
And
that's really really important.
why a spreadsheet and not a Word document? What are the advantages of doing it in a spreadsheet?
I find that I can organize my information with headings right across the columns in the top. I can see my data quite easily. I can see patterns. I can color code it. It works really well for what I do. I can add and subtract pages. I can add as I learn more as I go along. I can add additional criteria and tips and things like that. So I can um, I can adjust the criteria. So I can put the very specific criteria in the spreadsheet. Do they meet this? Do they not meet this? If they barely meet this, why? I like using those kinds of tools rather than handwriting copious notes, beyond with my highlighter marker. But beyond that, I do like to use data entry, and use a spreadsheet and put it all in front of me, because then I can look at the criteria on one side and how well they match on the other side. And when we need a tiebreaker, that's very indicative as well, in which case we have to figure out a way to do a tiebreaker, whether that's a combination of uh, having the candidate have breakfast with you and or do a case study, those kinds of things. And I think that means that we need to pull in a little bit of creativity, and I find that quite exciting.
No, you hit another great tip there. I also use spreadsheets for my notes. I've rarely met another soul that does that, so I'm glad that we're kindred spirits in that aspect. I also use it for performance reviews
Yep,
and scorecards.
yep.
Just in exactly what you said, you have an infinite amount of space to work with.
Hmm.
And you can also do low calculations and scores and additions
Yep.
and that sort of thing, and be able to create a single summary page by pulling in all those.
That's right.
Everything that you said, I couldn't agree with you more. I wish more people would use spreadsheets rather than Word documents, but by default, just people think, oh, it's a piece of paper, I'll use a Word document.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Hmm.
the power of spreadsheets. Are there any trends that you're seeing, whether it be positive or negative, or developments in recruitment and selection that sort of has piqued your interest or you're keeping an eye on?
I am keeping an eye on the trend towards uh, more video interviewing beforehand, and that kind of thing, because it seems to me, and the biggest complaint that I receive from candidates is the lack of human resources, and how it's very difficult to get feedback from a real human being. And for some some companies are using software that it's artificial intelligence that basically the computer is asking you questions and you look into your camera and you are basically talking to a computer, and at that time it's actually scanning and analyzing your facial expressions, so the nuances in your voice, your tone, your eye movements, whether they're going right or left or up and down or combination thereof, and making an analysis. And this all happens as part of the application process, and that can be quite unnerving, I think, for uh, human beings who are not who have not experienced that or not used to that, or who otherwise would be a great potential candidate if they could only navigate through the technology in a more comfortable way. So I'm noticing a lot of that, and I also know that there's a lot of pushback on that. So while that's happening, there's still the trend to focus on networking, forming relationships, asking for advice, to position yourself in such a way that you can have meaningful conversations with recruiters and hiring managers, so that you're invited to apply for a position and not necessarily have to go through that pain. What are your thoughts about that?
Oh, no one has asked me that yet in an interview. I understand. So being on both sides,
Hmm.
in the sense of a lot of people ask me for advice. At the same time, I teach recruitment and selection and do recruitment selection myself. Being a single HR generalist in a company, I have finite amount of time, and
Sure.
recruitment and selection is only a small part of my position in the organization. And a lot of candidates don't realize that, or forget, or have the expectation, or um, have a vision that there's one person working 24/7 trying to fill that one role that they've just applied for.
Hmm.
And the only way that I know how to give myself more time and try to make a better decision is to put automation
Hmm.
and additional steps and deselecting tools in front of candidates in order to try to weed out those individuals who are mass applying and those
Yes.
individuals who are truly want the position. And I think the biggest thing that technology has um, serve technology is a tool, so for better or for worse,
Hmm.
it just has allowed more people to apply more quickly, and especially with thing or platforms like Indeed, Job Shop, Monster, where the platforms themselves are telling candidates, "Hey, there's a new job post thing. If you just click here,
Yeah.
we'll automatically send your resume."
Oh boy.
And the least path of least resistance. So people are clicking, and like you said, you call up a candidate and they don't even know they applied for the position or didn't realize they applied for a position. So as with everything, there's got to be a Goldilocks zone. You can't go too heavily into technology and artificial intelligence. It should be a partnership,
Yes.
and you do need to have something, because I know that when I post an admin role, within 48 hours, I have 400 resumes.
Hmm.
And I can't, even if I spend 10 seconds on each resume, that is still 4,000 seconds.
You bet.
And I'm trying to do the math here real quickly, and I think that's I can't, 60. That's an hour.
Mhm.
I'm gonna embarrass myself, but it's quite some time
It sure is.
that you're going through there. What would you give? What kind of advice would you give recruiters or people that are just getting into recruitment selection that you sort of learned over the years that you'd like to pass on?
Remember that as much as you are dealing with volume, that there are real human beings on the other end of that application. And so to temper to temper your reactions to people who might be just mass applying, but there are people out there who are quite sincere. Um, I would probably say be active and responsive if you can. At least have some kind of a response that addresses the person by name. Dear Adam, thank you for your application for the position of blah blah blah. Uh, we will be following up with an email related to whether we're going to move forward with an interview uh, or not, and but don't leave them hanging. Find a way to build in a method by which you communicate or have some closure for the candidate, particularly for those who really have gone above and beyond to try to put forth their best effort to impress you. Have something that gives the candidate closure when they, particularly if you're accepting applications online. That I think would be helpful, and to uh, to be active on social media to be able to answer some general questions on what can you do, what would what are some tips I can give you to earn an interview at let's say you're working at ABC company. Uh, these are some things that you can think about if you want to apply for a job. We're always looking for good people, uh, those kinds of things. So to engage your potential candidate pool, be kind, give them closure. So if you have an automated process, then have some kind of a process that will give them closure as well. Acknowledge their application and say that we'll be following up with you, yay or nay. Uh, Find a nice way to wordsmith that. I think that would really help because a lot of people really just don't know what happens on the other side of the applicant tracking system when they do apply. So I think that would be important.
Absolutely. 90% of companies do not send out rejection letters or any kind of acknowledgement that for anyone that's applied that the position has been filled or that they've been rejected.
Mhm.
Uh, and finally, this is something that I'm kind of excited about to talk to you. Tell me about your book. So you are recently a best-selling author. This is your first book, correct?
Actually, it's my second book.
Second book.
Yes, I co-authored a book a couple years ago called "Surviving the Downturn," and so this is my own book, and this book is called "Take Aim: How to Get Noticed and Hired in Tough Times."
So without giving away the secrets, and for
Mhm.
people to be able to purchase the book themselves, can you just give us a sort of an overview of what they can expect to gain from the book?
Up-to-date job search strategies that will help people to find and be found for opportunities more easily. I'll call them wow factor resume tips and LinkedIn profile tips, conversation starters, how to approach recruiters and decision makers respectfully, how to ask for advice, and how to deal with rejection. It also has a lot of resources that address uh, the human needs element. Very often, people who lose jobs or looking for work are in a state of turmoil, and that could impact them emotionally. We see in my background as well as in counseling, I see a lot of people who are depressed or who are not reaching out for help. So I have resources in the book for people that they can reach out for help should they be struggling with things like basic needs, food, clothing, shelter, financial assistance, counseling, all those things that we may take for granted when we are employed. that really make people feel vulnerable when they don't have work coming in. I talk about do's and don'ts in terms of resumes, cover letters, following up. I also talk about having a very strategic job search plan that helps really to focus the reader on what they want, how they're going to get there, and how to identify potential opportunities in a much more effective, efficient way than they've done before. And the book's been very well received. It's available in many of the Chapters stores, Chapters Indigo in Calgary, and some of the smaller bookstores like Shelf Life and Owl's Nest. It's available in Edmonton. It's available in libraries. It's available in some of the post-secondary school libraries as well. And so I'm really excited and delighted that it's been received so well, and I'm looking forward to getting my next book out there next year. I'm just working on the outline for that now.
Well, you know what? I think we just have another interview in the future of how to write a book and get it out in a lot of locations. I think that would be a very interesting conversation if you're up
Oh,
for that.
I'm sure up for that. I'd be very glad to talk to you about that. I've learned so much over the last few years, and I'd be very glad to share some insights with you.
Perfect. So I'm going to say goodbye to you, but don't hang up on me.
Okay.
So Joy, thank you so much. It was a wonderful conversation with a lot of great tips that we haven't heard on other interviews. Thank you so much for sharing your evening with us, and we wish you all the best with everything that you're doing, with all the hats that you have. And I look forward, I'm going to pick up that book, and I look forward to your third book, but your second book that you didn't co-author, that you did solo.
Yes.
So thank you so much and have a great evening.
You too, Adam. Thank you.
Thank you for watching the interview. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe, and click on notifications so you don't miss the next one.